Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
They're not able to go on with their lives without having appropriate housing.
The 4,000-person wait list to get an accessible home in BC. Why so many people with disabilities are in limbo.
It's very fulfilling to know that I'm part of this.
How a small Indigenous fishery has helped restore salmon stocks in a Soyuz lake. And why BC has the lowest birth rate in the country.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Anita Bathe. We begin tonight with the reality that there are at least 4,000 people with disabilities in BC who are on a wait list for an accessible home. Many have been waiting for years, and it's meant struggles to get through the front door or even to go to the bathroom. As Anita Bathe tells us, there are now calls for the province to do something fast.
Kyle Jacques' one wish before his 29th birthday this month is to find an accessible home.
Some days I feel hopeless, other days I just keep pushing.
He's been searching for 9 months. At his current rental, he struggles just to get inside his home and even go to the washroom.
Risking falling, nobody's around, like what happens, you know?
Jacques is not alone. BC Housing says just under 4,000 people living with disabilities are on a wait list for an accessible home. Plus, around 1,100 more require wheelchair-modified units like this. Meanwhile, BC Housing funds around 3,200 accessible housing units. For Dan Duffy, finally getting an accessible home was a relief.
And I shed some tears of being I finally have a place that where, I know I'm going to stay here for a long time.
After years of searching, he now has a roll-in shower and lowered countertops and appliances to do what he loves, cook.
This is my favorite one because I put it on my spice rack. In my last place, I wasn't able to reach cabinets. I can go up here and I can reach this stuff.
He was able to find housing through the right fit. The organization pairs wheelchair users with accessible housing. 142 people are on its wait list, and that number is growing.
We're seeing more people with disabilities ending up in shelters.
And that's not something they've seen much of in the past.
Many of the clients that we had spoken to over the years had told us that they hadn't had showers in years because they didn't have an accessible home and an accessible bathroom. Some of our clients told us they had to crawl down the corridor to get to their bedroom.
The province agrees there's more to do. It says it's working to update the BC Building Code to make new buildings more accessible. It's also offering up to $17,500 in rebates for low to moderate income households. But advocates say more housing and subsidies for rent and repairs are needed now to offer some relief as thousands wait. Anita Bathe, CBC News, Vancouver.
And starting today, the province is also looking for ways to make cities more accessible. It's now requiring more than 750 public sector organizations to form accessibility committees. This includes local governments, school districts, and libraries. The goal is to reduce barriers for people living with disabilities and help make urban design more accessible. People living with disabilities tell CBC they want to see changes like more accessible housing, suitable parking, and more public washrooms. A memorial has burned down for Noelle O'Soup, the Indigenous girl found dead in an East Vancouver apartment in May. Vancouver Fire Rescue Services responded to calls early yesterday morning of a fire in Strathcona. After extinguishing the fire, they learned it was a memorial for O'Soup. Flowers, toys, and other items were placed around a tree in her honor, all destroyed by fire. Investigators say the fire could have been candles or possibly intentional, but there is no definitive explanation for what caused the blaze. The investigation has been concluded. We're learning tonight the man killed in a fight between neighbors in Surrey yesterday was a filmmaker well known in the South Asian community. Isabel Regam is live with us and with the latest from police on that deadly assault. Isabel, what more do we know about the victim?
Anita Bathe and family have confirmed the man killed is Manny Ummer, an award-winning filmmaker based in Surrey whose work sheds light on local South Asian issues. Investigators say Ummer died after he was assaulted shortly before 2 p.m. yesterday around 61 Avenue and 140 B Street. RCMP had been called to the new neighborhood for reports of a fight between two men. Today, police are saying officers found Ummer injured and he later died, adding that this was an isolated incident between two neighbors.
I know personally there's 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds that carry guns.
Ummer was well known for his work based in BC and for bringing attention to some difficult issues, including gang violence and domestic violence, with a documentary on Maple Battaglia.
He was instrumental in raising awareness about the gang violence, and he had had enough about hearing about all these shootings that were happening and the youth that were involved in gangs. The sad thing is that he had such passion to try and help kids to stay off the path of gang activity, and now he's no longer with us.
A suspect has been arrested, but there's no word on any charges at this point. That suspect has not been publicly identified at this point, Anita.
Isabel Regam live tonight. Thank you. Thanks. The family of an Indigenous man who died after being shot by Vancouver police with a beanbag gun is calling for accountability. Though the Independent Investigations Office is on the case, Eva Gwensenj tells us the man's family says they're still in the dark.
Chris Amiot died 10 days ago on East Hastings Street in the downtown East Side, moments after being shot by Vancouver police with a beanbag gun. Today, his family says they feel robbed.
Chris was a man that was in love with his partner, Amanda, and he was a good father to his children. He was a good grandfather to his stepdaughter, Venus.
The incident now under investigation by BC's police watchdog, but his family says they haven't heard from VPD or the IIO.
I mean, we want understanding, we want answers, we want to know. We have so many questions that have not been answered.
Bystanders told Wilson her cousin was sprayed by bear mace and was asking for help, and that police officers shot him 6 times with beanbag rounds.
I'm here to seek understanding and reasoning behind the split-second decision made by this police officer to pull his trigger 6 times instead of 1.
A memorial is growing on Hastings Street where Amiot was shot. Wilson says the location of his death is no coincidence.
And I believe that given the location of this incident in the downtown east side of Vancouver, that my cousin Chris was seen as just another vulnerable person in a vulnerable part of the city, and that no one would care about him if something bad happened to him.
Indigenous advocates say this incident is all too familiar to them, and national action is needed to investigate police-involved deaths.
But I think the federal government needs to step up to the plate and actually set in motion a complete review of all police brutality across this country. When Indigenous people lose their lives for no reason. And this is one clear example of that.
Amiot's family say they are looking at all legal recourse as well as the search for answers as to how and why Chris Amiot died. Eva Gwensenj, CBC News, Vancouver.
Airline catering workers at YVR are the latest source of labor strife at the airport. The union served strike notice back in July and is still pressing for a new contract with higher wages.
What do we want? Contract. When do we want it? Now.
Caterers employed by Gate Gourmet serve dozens of airlines at YVR, not just dealing with food, but also loading water onto the planes. They've been without a contract for 2 months, but are back in bargaining after withholding overtime.
A lot of people who work in the airport, they have to work 2 jobs in order to make ends meet. And nowadays, like I said, with the cost of living that's really gone high, it's even more important.
The union says airport workers in many roles have been working extended hours during the pandemic. Well, a second COVID-19 booster is on the way for British Columbians who want it. As a bivalent vaccine, it packs a double punch. The shot targets both the original strain of the coronavirus as well as the Omicron variant. The health ministry is calling it the fall booster and says shots will be available as soon as they arrive from Ottawa, likely later this month and into October. They are releasing more details on Tuesday, And this all comes after Health Canada approved the new vaccine from Moderna and purchased 12 million shots. Lauren Pelly has this report on the booster and what this means for Canadians as we head into the fall.
Health Canada has approved a new type of COVID shot from Moderna, a bivalent vaccine targeting both the original virus strain and the Omicron subvariant BA.1.
It's essentially two vaccines in one.
The new shot protects against several members of the Omicron family. Omicron subvariants now make up almost all of Canada's COVID cases. The latest federal data shows BA.1 and BA.2 make up less than 4% of infections. BA.4 totals around 10%, while BA.5 accounts for the vast majority of recent cases.
While the vaccine was designed to more specifically target the Omicron BA.1 subvariant, we know that this vaccine also generates a good immune response against the Omicron subvariants BA.4 and BA.5 that have more recently emerged.
U.S. officials already approved Pfizer and Moderna vaccines targeting those newer versions of the virus, and Canada won't be far behind.
We are expecting a submission as early as next week from Pfizer. We have had discussions with Moderna as well and are expecting them to also file within the next 2 weeks.
With kids heading back to school and cold weather approaching, Canadians now face another COVID conundrum. Which booster to get and when?
People really shouldn't be thinking of boosters as sort of an optional thing.
We asked vaccine experts for their advice.
I think if you haven't been boosted and you haven't had COVID recently, the overwhelming message ought to be go out and get a bivalent BA.1 booster as soon as it's available to you in your province.
As we move into an 8th wave.
But timing matters too, says this immunologist.
If you've just been infected, wait 3 months before you even consider being vaccinated. And if you've been vaccinated, wait 6 months until your next vaccine. And think about those, spreading out those packets of protection to give you the most time while you're protected.
Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
A small Indigenous fishery in the Okanagan is being credited with helping to return sockeye salmon stocks. Restoration work over the past 2 decades has restored fish migration routes to the region. And as Brady Strachan reports, that's cause for celebration for local First Nations.
All you, Shanda. Up.
Just looking at this bountiful catch of silverfish, it's no wonder the crew is excited. This catch has pulled in hundreds of sockeye salmon from Osoyoos Lake. It's tough work in the hot August sun, but for fishermen like Ole Clark, spirits are high.
Really busy, yes. I just love it. It's just awesome to be out here every day except for the warm days. I got really dark over the last month.
For the past month, Clark and his crew have caught 10,000 sockeye for Indigenous communities and another 40,000 fish for the Okanagan Nation Alliance commercial fishery.
It feels awesome helping community members get their fish and watching them go to the market, come back to be canned and candied and all that good stuff.
This year has seen a record return of sockeye. Well over 500,000 fish are projected to arrive in Canadian waters, destined for spawning beds in Okanagan rivers and streams. Just to get here, it's a mammoth 1,000-kilometer journey. From the Pacific Ocean, the fish travel upstream, first in the Columbia River, past 8 hydroelectric dams, before reaching the Okanogan River in Washington state, and then past one more dam to enter Osoyoos Lake. For several decades, the Okanagan sockeye's migration was cut off by dams on the river system, but work over the last 20 years, driven by First Nations, has reopened the migration channel and restored spawning grounds. The abundant return of salmon this year is the fruit of their labors.
It's very fulfilling to know that I'm part of this, that I'm only a small part of something that our people have done for millennia, in terms of feeding their families and having access to their foods where they live and grow their families.
Back on shore, today's catch is loaded into containers and put on ice. As the season comes to an end, workers like Michael Reed are optimistic about the future of the sockeye in the Okanagan.
I'm excited for the possibilities and the potential for the fishery and for the food fish and and just developing communication with all the bands and making it work for everybody.
Biologists say the success here in the Okanagan will be used as a model to bring sockeye salmon back to other river systems in the years to come. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Osoyoos Lake.
An encouraging example because there's also a warning tonight, one that says without strong, urgent action on climate change and overfishing, the world's fish stocks stand little chance of returning to previous levels. It comes from a global research team led by UBC professor, also Canada's research chair in ocean sustainability. They looked at more than 200 distinct marine regions, including along the BC coast, and used computer modeling to predict what could happen over the next 80 years. What is seen as a level of sustainable fishing may have come down even further, but even then, those stocks only have a hope of rebuilding if sea level temperatures stop rising.
If we are not being effective in mitigating climate change, many of the rebuilding plans will become ineffective.
He says one of the marine regions at risk is along BC's southern coast, which has seen significant negative effects of climate change. He says governments must work to slow the effects of climate change, but individuals can take small steps as well. Well, it's good news for people trying to fill those last days of summer break. Movies at all major theater chains in BC are showing for just $3 this weekend. The one-day event is all part of National Cinema Day, which is taking place at theaters across North America. Like I said, it's the major chains that are taking part, so check with your local cinema to see if they are going to be involved. I don't know, Joe, it's quite the toss-up. Spend the day outside, the last sunny day, or go to a movie.
A $3 movie.
A $3 movie.
I was thinking the same. Yeah, there's the new Minions that we've got to go see, but it's also going to be sunny and warm. So, yeah, I'll let you know what I'm thinking, but it is certainly a toss-up. And I don't think we're the only ones, Anita, going to have to make the hard call because temperatures are coming down for the start of the weekend, but it's also the one dry day we've got over the long weekend. I want to start off, though, with a look back on August. If it's felt like heat wave after heat wave, our August numbers are backing that up. August was the hottest August ever on record for Vancouver. Our mean temperatures, so the average between our max and mins, coming in at 19.8, our max 24.1, and also interestingly, we are in a five-way tie for first place for consecutive days over 20 degrees. Again, ever on record. But also August 2022 is in second place for hottest month ever on record. You'd have to go back to July 1958 for that record. And as August heat spills into September, that is showing up in our fire danger rating, continuing to see more of those highs and extremes build in the south and the northeast. And we still have the heat warnings in place for one more day, Anita. So tomorrow, hot and sticky before the big movie decision on Saturday. I'll give us some more information to make the call later on in the show.
Okay, we definitely need that extra info. Thanks,
We
Joe.
do. You're welcome.
Well, for the last 50 years, if you've seen a story about politics in Delta or Richmond, chances are you've seen a story involving Lois Jackson or Harold Steeves. They are the two longest-serving civic politicians in British Columbia, and now they are both retiring. Our Justin McElroy spoke to them about how their respective cities and city halls have changed over the decades.
When you've been doing the same job for a half-century or more, what does retirement look like?
I'm going to be very busy. I'm just going to keep on doing what I'm doing. I just won't be on council, that's all.
When Harold Steeves was first elected to council in 1968, Richmond had a third of the population it does today, and the beach he is standing on here was set for development. It's now Garry Point Park, one of many green or agricultural spaces Steeves has fought to preserve in his career.
And we didn't know how to fight City Hall, and whatever the City Council did, they just did, and we took it to that you couldn't do anything about it. But today, if you do something that people don't like, they'll organize and campaign and write petitions, write letters, and attend council meetings, and sometimes they're successful in changing the council's mind. And that's the role I've played for the last 50 years.
Across the Fraser, there's another politician leaving after 5 decades in office. Lois Jackson was first elected in 1972 as Delta's first female councillor.
Being recognized as having a brain was a little different. So you really had to be quite creative.
Jackson said she had a strategy back then.
I used to tell my mate next to me, what do you think about this, this, or this? Good idea. I would move, so he would move it, I would second it, and we'd get it done.
But Jackson quickly carved out a name for herself, getting elected time after time, eventually serving 19 years as mayor. A key to her success, she says, was representing young families in a growing city that needed more amenities.
I think it was because I was a mother. Seriously. We had so many children then here, and we needed so many things to keep them safe and happy, active.
The two politicians have seen their communities change, and have also seen the ways people engage with each other change too.
On social media, you got a lot of people, unnamed people that trolls or whatever that attack you on it, and sometimes it's quite difficult to take. But by and large, it's a good way of people communicating and spreading the message around if there's any issues happening, and it certainly helps to get people out.
But they leave happy to have made their mark working on issues with direct impact on people right where they live.
There's so much more you could do at the local level on all the other issues. And so I bought into the slogan they used to have at the day is think globally, act locally.
I guess I like the local flavor. I like the neighborhood. I like the little, coming down and watching the kids. I guess I felt I could do more good at home.
They've both done a lot for their cities, though others will now take up the mantle going forward. Justin McElroy, CBC News, Vancouver.
Yeah, I remember many times working as a morning reporter, and you'd call Lois Jackson at 5 a.m., sometimes 4:30 in the morning, and she'd answer, ready and willing to talk and serve her community. Congrats on a long and great career to both of you. Canada's lowest birth rate, why so few British Columbians are making a family. We talk babies and BC next. Thanks for watching our commercial-free live stream. It's an exciting time for 4 kids from Fort McMurray in Alberta who are heading to Sweden next month to help represent Canada in the Volt World Cup. It's an adaptive hockey tournament for children with disabilities. And as the CBC's Jamie Malbuff reports, the community is really getting behind the boys.
Fort McMurray's Volt players are hard at work practicing, getting ready to represent Canada's Volt Alberta team in the upcoming World Cup. Young players are between 10 and 12 years old and use a special chair operated by a joystick to allow them to play hockey despite mobility issues. And they couldn't be more excited to be taking part.
My heart dropped, actually.
4 of the team members are in Fort McMurray, but the others are from Edmonton and Calgary, which makes getting together for practice a bit of a challenge.
At the start of the weekend, I had some concerns. We weren't meshing as a team very well. And then by the end of the weekend, it was great. We were playing so well together, and the kids were just really getting along together well.
This is the first time many of the kids will go to Europe, and it's the first time Canada will be represented in the Volt World Cup.
I love it. It's very fun.
I love it. It's very fun.
It's a growing sport with teams from Europe, the US, and Canada. It only came to Fort McMurray in January, but the community welcomed it.
I knew as soon as he sat in the chair, he was hooked because he loves driving anything that moves. And but I never dreamed that it was something this big.
And for these kids, it is a big deal. They've already been getting a lot of attention for their roles on the team.
Oh, he thinks he's so, what is the word? Famous. He's so famous now. And he loves it all. Loves all the attention.
The kids head out to the tournament in mid-September. Jamie Malbuff, CBC News, Fort McMurray.
Well, it turns out BC has the lowest birth rate in the country, according to New Stats Canada data, but there's no single reason why. In 2020, BC women on average had 1.17 children, with Nova Scotia being the next lowest in Canada with 1.24 kids. Nationally, the fertility rate fell about 16%, from 1.68 in 2009 to 1.4 in 2020. But in BC, the drop was steeper, down 22% from 1.47 to 1.17. Now, research say that high housing costs are partially to blame, but also changing demographic trends. For more on what this data means and why this is happening, I'm joined live tonight by Vancouver-based data analyst Jens van Bergman. Thanks for being with us.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
Jens, we know there are several reasons. Like I mentioned, housing costs are one of them, but can you give us more detail about why this is happening?
Right, so we've seen Canada-wide a decline in fertility rates, and that's something that where Canada is not unique. So we see this in many countries around the world. Some of the drivers are simply things like education. So people that go to university typically postpone their childbirth till after education. So as more people go to university and people stay in school longer, that drags out this start. And that is one big factor of what's driving this on a national level and also internationally in other wealthy countries.
So if we look at BC specifically, then what makes BC different from a place like Quebec or Ontario?
Yeah, so it's always hard to say, pin everything down on one very particular cause. But one thing that we've seen that BC used to be about middle of the pack in Canada in terms of the fertility rate. The fertility rate is just the estimated number of children a woman would have in during their childbearing ages. So it's estimated just by looking at the current rates of birth by age, and then it's an age-adjusted metric. And so that used to be at the middle of the pack, but that has dropped off. And starting since about 2013, BC has been the lowest in Canada, and the gap to the next one has been widening.
Well, and we know you sort of touched on this a little bit about, people going to school and then delaying childcare. So we know we can't lump all of BC into this data. How much of a difference are we seeing in terms of cities that are close to Vancouver or Vancouver itself compared to rural parts of the province?
So in general, in rural areas, fertility rates tend to be higher, and that is part of that reason. But one thing that we must say, and that's something we really see in BC, is that there's been a delay of the starting of childbirth. So if we look at the fertility rates by age, it's been dropping quite rapidly and much more than in other provinces below the ages of 35. But it actually has been increasing and increasing faster than other provinces above the ages of 35. So there has been this delaying in childbirth that sort of this data seems to show. And it's just at the older age groups, it's hard to catch up. So if you start later, you'll have fewer children.
And how much does wealth tie into that conversation? People perhaps feeling like the cost of living is so high, but they're more settled a little bit later in life.
Right. So the mechanism how usually researchers think about how housing costs affect things like fertility is through household formation. So when it becomes difficult to form your own household, to form your own family, when maybe you stay living with your parents longer, or when you go and live with roommates in roommate situations longer, and don't form your own household, that delays everything that usually comes after that step.
Okay.
And and so that's something we definitely see in BC, especially in Toronto and Vancouver. We also see it in other parts of Canada, like Toronto, where these things happen.
Jens van Bergman, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
Turning now to a crisis in our province. More than 100 British Columbians are killed every month through the toxic drug supply. While BC is moving forward with a decriminalization pilot in January, some advocates are tired of waiting and are taking matters into their own hands. As Liam Britton reports, Health Canada has okayed one such project while rejecting another.
Longtime overdose prevention advocate Sarah Blythe knows marijuana isn't a cure-all for issues with addiction and overdose. But she says it can help some people.
That people use it for sleeping, they use it for pain, they use it for trauma, sometimes using it instead of opiates.
This week, the High Hopes Cannabis Dispensary relaunched after a years-long hiatus. It started in 2017 as a harm reduction program in Vancouver's downtown east side. Organizers distribute marijuana as an alternative to street drugs. The program ended when cannabis was legalized, but now it's back. Health Canada's granted it a license to distribute medical marijuana.
It's really a small piece of the puzzle of the safe supply that's needed. What we need is safe supply of everything.
Blythe says the goal is to eventually branch out and distribute other drugs safely. She says bold action is needed to provide a safe supply of the toxic street drugs that have killed so many in BC. I'm here in the downtown east side where one group is making those bold moves already. The Drug User Liberation Front has spent a month running a compassion club selling tested drugs to members, but federal authorities are not condoning their actions. Eris Nix is a co-founder of the group. The club has been selling unadulterated cocaine, heroin, and meth. She says they haven't seen a single overdose from their products, which are acquired via the dark web.
Only been running for a month, is that it is improving people's social and health outcomes. Folks are doing better on this program than they would with a medicalized safe supply model. They're using less drugs, they're spending less money, they're committing less crime, etc.
The group spent a year applying for a federal exemption to drug rules that would allow them to sell these substances on a nonprofit basis to club members. Late in July, they got the answer from Health Canada: no. Health Canada, in a statement to CBC, says that requested exemption would have allowed the purchase of illegally produced controlled substances from illegal vendors. Supplying drugs from illegal vendors is not a viable option for the protection of public health and the maintenance of public safety. Nix calls that Kafkaesque. They can't get the drugs from a legal source, so they're seeking judicial review of the decision.
We'll do whatever we have to by any means necessary to take care of our community.
About 6 British Columbians die every day because of toxic drugs. Action, she says, can't wait. Liam Britton, CBC News, Vancouver.
A dangerous journey to a besieged nuclear power plant. The CBC is on the ground in Zaporizhia. We take you there next.
The fans gathered at a local radio station last night cheered when Who bassist John Entwistle emerged from a limo en route to a live interview. They cheered even louder when lead singer Roger Daltrey did the same, even though Who members are old enough to have fathered most of the die-hard kids waiting for a glimpse.
They may be 40 years old, but they know how to rock and roll, and their music touches you.
I've been a fan since way back, since my generation.
I always listen to them ever since I can remember. My brother and my sister.
Even though they could be your dad.
Yeah, well, they could be. I was adopted.
Last night's fans didn't see lead guitarist Pete Townsend. He's still recovering from a minor hand injury suffered in Tacoma while doing his famous windmill guitar strum. But the show will definitely go on tonight. Why, you may ask, are these now middle-aged guys going back on the road anyway? They have openly admitted it's for the money, and they expect to make piles of it during this 26-city tour. They'll need to. They're spending heaps staging this mega production. It takes 4 days, 18 trucks, 100 tons of equipment, and 170 people to set up their stage. And there are 4 stages on the road just to keep up with the tour schedule. But the Who is drawing the crowds, and the money is rolling in, and that's good news for Vancouver.
The first show we didn't particularly put tickets on sale in Seattle, but people were more than welcome to phone up here and charge by phone. The second show we did sell 7,000 tickets in Seattle alone, and you can't get a hotel room now to save your life in the city. One of the bosses is trying to come in from Montreal and we can't put him anywhere.
The kids waiting at the back door of this radio station don't really care how much money's involved in the Who's 25th anniversary tour. All they really want to be sure of is having their $32 ticket to make sure they see the Who either tonight or tomorrow night for perhaps the last time. Michelle Gibson, CBC News, Vancouver.
UN inspectors arrived at Ukraine's nuclear power plant today, planning to assess the state of the complex and talk to workers there. That trip could be described as perilous and dangerous. Susan Ormiston reports from the front lines.
Returning from a perilous mission, crossing front lines, Rafael Grossi briefed Ukraine's energy minister on the trip inside the Russian-controlled nuclear plant. What were you able to accomplish in the few hours that you were at the nuclear plant?
In spite of the fact that I was there for 4 or 5 hours, I saw a lot.
Grossi confirmed inspectors will remain at the besieged Zaporizhia plant.
We are not going anywhere. The IAEA is now there, is at the plant, and is not moving.
The long-awaited mission was almost scuttled before it began. Good morning, Mr. Grossi.
Good morning, Mr. Grossi.
Good morning. Shells pounded into the city of Enerhodar early this morning, said Ukraine. One of 2 working reactors had to be shut down. Russian attack helicopters circled. The team of inspectors sped out of the city, heading towards the front line. We followed behind for just 20 minutes before the convoy suddenly stopped. This was as far as we were allowed to go, and the convoy was stopped as well. Just up here, the road too dangerous to pass. They were stuck here for more than 3 hours.
A lot of helicopters in the city.
Ukraine's energy minister said the area was extremely volatile.
It's craziness, so it's heavy shooting there. It was shelling also the station. I understand it's kind of mess in the city and on the station also.
Finally cleared to move, the mission reached the plant in mid-afternoon. Grossi says they were able to tour the entire site, including the emergency systems and diesel generators, escorted by Russians and trailed by Russian media. Ukraine wants the plant demilitarized, which Russia has refused.
Everybody will be able to sleep safely only if there will be no Russians, not only Russian militaries actually on site and in the area of the plant, because it should be a non-military zone. It's evident for everybody.
The IAEA is expected to provide a detailed report once technical data has been collected and analyzed.
I worry, and I will continue to be worried about the plant until we have a situation which is more stable.
That is still a long way off. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Zaporizhia, Ukraine.
The United Nations is accusing China of widespread human rights violations. The High Commissioner for Human Rights has released a long-delayed report on China's crackdown on Uyghurs and others. As Abby Kugadasan reports, Beijing is calling these claims lies.
A damning report out of Geneva. The United Nations says China's crackdown in the northwestern province of Xinjiang may be considered a crime against humanity. The nearly 50-page report outlines various human rights violations against Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim minority groups. The agency spoke to former inmates who've been detained in China. Many gave accounts of treatment that amounts to torture, including being beaten with electric batons, waterboarding, and sexual violence. The UN calls the claims credible. It points out the birth rate in Xinjiang fell by nearly half in just 2 years between 2017 and 2019 and believes coercive measures are likely to blame. There have been accounts of forced sterilization and abortions in the past. The World Uyghur Congress spokesperson Zumrathai Erkin says this report is momentous.
I think this report is a landmark report, not only because it comes from the highest, UN body, but also because of the content of the report. It's pointing out to possible crimes against humanity, which is beyond our expectations.
This report comes nearly 3 years after it was first commissioned. UN Human Rights High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet's office made the document public mere minutes before her tenure ended in Geneva. Beijing has denied any wrongdoing and brushed off the agency's findings.
We are firmly opposed to such a report. We all know so well that the so-called Xinjiang issue is a completely fabricated lie out of political motivations.
Rights groups say more than 1 million people are being held against their will in internment camps in China. The UN is calling for their release. It's also asking countries not to deport Uyghurs back to China, given its findings. Abby Kwoldasin, CBC News, London.
With the summer winding down and tourist season drawing to a close, places that rely on visitors are tallying up their year. And for some of them, it looks disappointing, mainly because travelers from the U.S. have stayed away. Some experts say that's because travel habits have changed during the pandemic. But as Sophia Harris reports, there are those who believe federal policies are to blame.
Tourists have returned to Niagara Falls, but something's missing. A lot of Americans. Are you an American?
No, Canadian.
The number of road trips Americans made to Canada over the past 2 months was down by close to half compared to pre-pandemic times. The lack of American visitors is taking its toll on Niagara Falls, a popular tourist destination right next to the U.S. border. Niagara Helicopters offers tours of the falls. The company says bookings are down 35% this summer compared to 2019, largely due to fewer American tourists.
The decline in business from the Americans is actually very devastating for us. That is our bread and butter market.
So what's keeping Americans away? First, only those who are vaccinated can enter Canada. Plus, this expert says habits formed during COVID can be hard to break.
I think people have changed their consumer habits, they've changed their vacation habits.
She also believes the ArriveCan app is a deterrent. Travelers must use it to enter their vaccination and travel information before entering Canada. The mayor of Niagara Falls says the app is holding back many Americans.
They're telling me it's easier to go to Europe than it is to come to Canada. That's frustrating.
Candace Fuller of Buffalo is no fan of the app. She says she won't be resuming regular trips to Niagara Falls until it's dropped.
Before the pandemic, I used to go on the fly. Now with using the app, you have to plan your trip ahead of time, and it's kind of hard to do that.
Use ArriveCan by...
The app is set to stay in place until at least October. This week, Transport Minister Omar Al-Gabra said ArriveCan reduces wait times at the border, but added that he's weighing the criticism.
We're listening and we're working with our stakeholders.
The mayor wants action now and says it's time to scrap the app to help the city's struggling tourism industry. Sophia Harris, CBC News, Toronto.
At 6:43, a live look at the city of Santa Rosa tonight, just north of San Francisco, where it's currently 28 degrees, but away from the ocean, much hotter. Dangerous heat hitting that state. We'll talk about the wide-ranging impacts next.
culture, freedom, unique, vibrant. My name is Jagan McKinley. I've been playing steel pan since I was 10 years old. Steel pan itself has a very rich history. Drumming was monumental to the African culture. They used it to celebrate, to communicate, to express themselves, to have an identity after being brought to a foreign land. And they were afraid that these people might cause a revolt, so they banned drums. That's where metal objects started to come into play. Garbage bins, garbage lids, paint cans. In the 1930s, a man named Winston Spree Simon came up with the first instrument, we can say. Music, notes, pitches, ranges were formed. And in about 1941, a man named Elie Manette came up with the first steel drum as we know it today. The steel pan has definitely 100% brought me closer to my culture and my identity. My father straight up bought me a steel pan when I was 10 and said, you have to learn how to play this. This is what we do back home. The steel pan is Trinidad's national instrument, so it's a big source of revenue and pride for the country. I've never really traveled to Trinidad before. I was able to get a sense of the culture through my days in the pan yard. A day in the pan yard is like any day on the job or on the team. Some days feel like boot camp, and then some days it could feel like a party. It's amazing when all of us are on the same page, the same wavelength, straight up. That's your family, that's your home away from home. It was a place to go when you didn't have anywhere to go. The pan yard was there. So the event I am practicing for currently is the Pan Alive in Toronto. Every year they hold this big competition, tons of people come out, they compete, and then the next day they celebrate with the festival. So Canada was thinking we should adopt this too. And just like in Trinidad, we get together, we put our hours in, we put the hard work in. Everything you've been working for matters. You have to get into the mind state of we're gonna play our song, we're gonna do our best. Then at the end, there's a silence. And then after that silence, the applause fills the stadium. That moment itself brings me back every time. It's important for people to learn about the steel pan, not even just people of African descent, but anybody really, because it really speaks to our greatness as human beings. Remember, these things are made from trash cans. The idea of making something out of nothing is what human beings have been doing for years. We really are made to overcome, to grow, we're made to develop. When we finally are finished, we have this beautiful song that people can listen to, smile, dance to, relate to, or even say, what is that? I want to get into this. That's what keeps me going, the culture, the movement, the music, the passion. We practice under a bridge. Who does that, right?
Extreme weather continues across parts of the U.S. In some areas of California, temperatures could be 10 degrees above average this long weekend, including Death Valley, which could see the hottest September day ever recorded on Earth. Renee Filipponi walks us through the strain this is putting on the state's power system.
Water and retardant are dropped from the air in an attempt to control a fire north of Los Angeles. It shut down part of a major highway and forced people in the area out of their homes.
Just craziness, firefighters left and right, the police here and there, just hearing the sirens and the helicopters.
Near San Diego, a fast-moving brush fire led to the closure of a border crossing with Mexico. Officials worry the situation is only going to get worse.
The fire behavior and what you saw yesterday should be a wake-up call to us all about the potential that we're in and we're entering into over the next few days in terms of the fire conditions.
A state of emergency has been issued by the governor as temperatures are expected to soar above 40 degrees in some areas this weekend.
All of us have been trying to outrun Mother Nature, but it's pretty clear that Mother Nature has outrun us.
To protect the electrical grid, residents are being urged to curb usage by avoiding charging electric vehicles and turning up their thermostats.
The problem that California faces on these hot days is almost entirely air conditioning.
This heat wave comes on the heels of an exceptionally hot summer and ongoing drought.
Here in California, we're now in a climate where pretty much every year is above average, and as a result, we're not just getting warmer summers overall, but we're getting hotter heat waves.
At the Santa Barbara Zoo, staff do everything they can to keep the animals cool in this dangerous heat.
They're always going to be playing in the water, but by providing the extra ice for them, it's a little bit, it's going to be a little bit more cooling, refreshing for them.
This is set to be the longest and most intense heat wave the region has seen this year. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now with the forecast. And Joe, that weather system that's hitting California is what's hitting us too, isn't it?
It's true, Anita. The center of this high pressure system is actually anchored in the U.S. Southwest. Look at the current temperatures right now across, much of the continent. You can see Sacramento right now, 41 degrees. LA has been hitting the mid 40s over the past couple of days. And that is what's ushering that hot and dry air towards the coast, the center of that high pressure really being in the four corners of the U.S. Southwest. But we're getting the top end of it. That rotation, that clockwise rotation, is punching that heat up into BC. Right now, 34 in Osoyoos, 33 Castlegar, and 35 up towards Lillooet. Now, YVR, we have been breaking daily temperature records across Metro Vancouver, West Van for the past 3 days, up towards Whistler, I should say. Things are going to cool down. Even though that high pressure is going to stay in place for California, the top end of it gets pushed east and to the south. So by Saturday, look at that notable cool down. Abbotsford back down to a 23, staying cooler as we head into the weekend and into early next week. Notice all those oranges and reds. Those are now off to our south and east. The cooler, more seasonal greens move in. That's the Pacific air. And you can see it in our forecast systems map as well. The rain moving into Haida Gwaii, central coastal sections for the weekend. And then that stream of moisture will work its way down into Metro Vancouver for Sunday. So I think we have a dry Saturday, and that dryness is showing up across most of southern BC. Still hot for Friday and Saturday. But really coming down in temperatures for Saturday in Metro Vancouver and the interior for Sunday. Okay, let's break it down. I know there's a lot going on, long weekends, back to schools. Still a hot one tomorrow. It's going to feel very similar to today. I do want to mention there is a chance of seeing that fire smoke move back towards the coast. We saw it along our sort of horizon yesterday evening. Those fires just to the east of Fraser Valley may get pushed back. So heads up, hazy Friday. Saturday, increasing clouds as we get that marine air move in. $3 movies looking not too shabby. Showers on Sunday, not a washout, but we do need the rain across the south coast lingering into Monday. And then look at that, Anita, our first high teen highs in over 30 days. At that point, it'll be 35 days and counting, our longest stretch of hot weather in quite some time.
Wow, no kidding. And I think Sunday looks like it may be a good day for a movie, for sure.
I'll see you at the Minions.
Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
Well, every year, dinosaur hunters descend on Alberta in the hopes of finding bones. But this year, it's not bones that have them excited. We'll tell you what they found next.
Fertilizer is very important because one of the things that we do with fertilizer is it replaces the nutrients that we remove when we remove a crop. So it's one of the building blocks of all plant life. So without it, the crop yields would diminish and slowly go down. And as farmers, we'd call that mining our fields. Mm-hmm. Essentially, we'd be using up the amount of nitrogen that's available in the soil, and then eventually, once it's depleted, our yields would continue to decline. So in most cases, we're just replacing or enhancing what we need to produce the most yield that we possibly can on the fewest number of acres. Basically, the way they are coming out with those emissions is basing it on the number of tons that are actually sold. But not all the way it's applied and the timing in which it's applied and the rate in which it applies impacts the actual amount of emissions that occur. And they're not accounting for that at all. And there's been a tremendous amount of technology over the past 30 or 40 years that have really reduced the amount of emissions that we control. This is by far the most expensive canola crop and any crop that we've ever grown in history right now. And so we really are relying on high prices and hopefully good yields to be able to make that back. There's no point in having great prices if you don't have anything to sell, so the two have to go hand in hand with each other. I think farmers are very good at adapting to the new technology as they come out, so we're doing everything that we possibly can right now. There is some room in maybe precision farming that's available, but it's extremely expensive. The equipment to do it is extremely expensive and challenging, and new technology always takes a little bit more time to learn, but that's not going to amount to 30% reduction.
Paleontologists in Alberta are excited about a rare find. Now, every summer, bone hunters from around the world visit the Badlands, home to one of the best dinosaur bone deposits on the planet. But what they're buzzed about now is dinosaur skin. Aaron Collins joined them on their dig to find out why this discovery is so significant.
If you're on the hunt for dino bones, this is the spot. It's what brought these bone hunters to the area, part of a paleontology field school. They stumbled upon the find of a lifetime.
So you come around this corner, and what do you see?
Well, we see some bones just kind of sticking out of the cliff, and then I turned to Brian and I'm like, what do you think this is? And it turns out that it was something really cool.
Those bones from a young hadrosaur, so common in these parts, they were known as the cattle of the Cretaceous period. What makes this find so cool? Millions of years after this dino died, skin still clings to its bones.
So what do we have here?
This is a sample of fossilized skin of a hadrosaur or duck-billed dinosaur.
Okay, so dinosaur skin, why do we care about that?
We care about it because normally when we find dinosaurs, we just have the skeleton. We don't have we only have the bones, we don't have the skin, we don't have the details of the anatomy. So having the skin really fleshes out the animal literally, and we can learn a lot more about the anatomy.
After the find, the heavy work begins. These fossils are just one of hundreds of major discoveries made in the area. A bone boom of sorts, helping the world learn more about dinosaurs.
Fossils in Alberta are considered historical artifacts. They can't be publicly owned. They're owned by the province, and they're available for scientific research.
As work is underway to unearth one dinosaur, another find just meters away.
You found another one. What does that say about this area when it comes to the number of bones here?
So this is crazy. We're having our interview and we see part of a hadrosaur skull here. It's a post-orbital bone. If I was to find this in Scotland or England, it would go straight to the museum.
But not here. These bone hunters are after a bigger prize, one that will take time to bag. It takes years to get a skeleton out of the ground and into a museum. Aaron Collins, CBC News, Dinosaur Provincial Park, Alberta.
That is incredibly surreal to see. Very cool stuff. That is it for CBC Vancouver News on this Thursday evening. Thanks for being with us and have a great night.